Well, one of my best listeners and critics is Wayne Frost, and his comment on my telling last night of the beginning of the scroll was that it was lacking vinegar or salt and vinegar. I knew it was. I was tired, uh, and that's going to happen. It's just I called it a spring telling as opposed to that the Lance, the first book, was a late winter telling. Some of these days I'm so tired by the evening that it's going to show, no doubt. But it also, this is a new genre. I have no experience with this genre. I've never seen it done before. I'm telling a novel, a very, very long novel, online, uh, straight into the camera. This is fiction. Uh, there are so many documentaries and there's so many vlogs and blogs, and uh, but I'm telling a story. I'm a storyteller, and there's going to be times where the storyteller is tired. Well, I'm tired tonight too, but this is a little bit easier in a way because something new is going to happen. What I had to do in the last telling, I felt, was to bring those up to speed who weren't following from the very beginning. I mean, for 80 chapters, I've been telling the story, and now to come aboard, what does a listener need to know, and what not need to know, and how tedious is that going to be for someone who already knows the story? I'm dealing with it, so I'm doing the best I can. Anyway, Violet and Elaine expected company. This they expected. They had not expected the arrival of Lance, who arrived at their door 10 days before. But as I told you, Violet had called for help to a very old friend of hers named Edgy. And because she has been accused of, of murder, of attempted murder, assault with a deadly weapon. And it's just so different from her, you can't imagine. And she was going to have to go to court. She was going to have to go to a court hearing. And so she called an old friend. Well, that old friend, I'm going to tell you some about him. And Why don't I start before he even gets there? I'll tell you some about him. Edgy is a little bit older than Violet. He was one of the six, the Catole Six, who had served in the same little city or town in Brazil named Catole de Rocha, the Catole Six. Now, at any given time, there had only been two of them there. Uh, there was at the time that Edgy was there. There was Rosemary, uh, and then after her came her younger sister, uh, uh, Violet. And at the same time Violet was there, Wedge was serving in Peace Corps. They had known each other all the way back in high school, and it was part of a Peace Corps experiment to see how that would work if there was overlapping with family members or people that knew each other at a given project or site. So both Wedge and Violet had been part of that experiment. And then after they left, then there was the boss, they called him, Bossiano uh, Venu- Bos- Bossanio, well, everyone called him the boss. Bassanio Venuciano, I think is his real name, but people just called him the boss. And he was served there along with a Brazilian woman named Portia, whom he married. So that was the Catole Six, and Edgy was one of them. Now, Edgy, Violet has often referred to him as the smartest man she'd ever known. He just seemed to know so much. He was a Yale graduate. There he had double majored in Spanish and history. And, there's rivalry between Yale and Harvard. Now, Wedge had never known him before Peace Corps, but Wedge had gone to Harvard. And, should there be rivalry? No, there was none at all. Edgy had excelled at Yale. Harvard, Wedge had managed to survive. He'd been an English major, but he had not thrived the way Edgy had. And Edgy now he had a real deep bass voice, and he had a way of using language that everything about him made him seem smart. He spoke in a way that would use words and style that you'd normally expect to be written. You wouldn't expect to hear somebody use those words in idle conversation, but he did often, and he'd get amused and they were usually exactly the right words if you knew them. And he had a funny way of laughing, kind of a yuck, 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 when he knew that he had said just the right thing, and he'd said it to somebody who realized what he'd said. Now, when he would arrive, Gandalf comes to mind, if you know that character from fiction. When he would arrive somewhere, he gave people the feeling that things were okay. If they weren't okay, things were going to be okay. It was just comfortable to have him there. And it's one of the reasons that Violet had turned to him, and he was coming. He drove a mustard-colored Ford Pinto from all the way back 1980 or something like that. Through good care and not driving very much, he'd managed to keep it on the road. And it had a habit of backfiring all the time, which maybe could have been fixed, but he thought that was kind of funny anyway. So you could always tell if he was coming or leaving, because you could hear his car backfiring. And Violet heard that. He was about to arrive. She heard him before she saw him. And it wasn't even lunch yet. So she rushed back out and showed him where to park. And this was a happy greeting. I should say one other thing about Edgy. Well, a couple things. His last name was Mundo. He was Irish by extension. Now, how an Irishman would end up with a name like Mundo, I don't know. Maybe I'll ask him sometime. And he never married. He'd had some close calls, he said, but he'd actually never married. There's just so much to tell you about him. He'd had an adopted family, which were Vietnamese refugees from the Vietnamese War. He was like their god. He was like a god grandfather to them, which becomes important because he's got a wedding in the family that he's going to have to get back to Boston. I'm just going to call it Boston. It's not Boston. It's actually near Boston. He's got to get back there before the week's out. So much to say about him. But anyway, Violet heard the backfiring, and he was coming, and out she went, and there was a happy greeting.